What is it about the birth of culture and society that perhaps the best way to figure it out is to build one up by yourself from scratch? I set out to design a 3D model of a shield, and as I thoughtlessly strung together various elements and references into my mood board to be included in the creation of the shield, I realized I couldn't exactly decide on the shape, the material, or even the color, because I didn't know who held it, what they held it against, or even why they needed it in the first place. Perhaps a shield isn't just a barrier against a sword. It is a physical artifact of a specific group of people, from a specific point in time, facing specific threats. To build a shield, I couldn't just start modeling it from whatever references I could find on Pinterest. I had to envision the hands that held it, build the tools used to craft it. I had to build a faith, a war, and a god to kill. It was an ordinary morning for Murad and his people as they foraged the mountains for fruit when they came across an unsuspecting deer. The foreman knew instantly what they were going to bring back to the tribe tonight for dinner. With each step as silent as a shadow, they surrounded their mark, armed with sharpened stone-tipped spears. Once in position, the foremen, in untold synchrony, jumped at the deer, their startled prey with nowhere to run. When all of a sudden, the sky grew dark and the winds howled through the woods. The hairs on Murad's arm stood up and his eyes sharpened, mind-focused, because they were no longer the hunter. He looked at his men and they scanned the forest in all directions lest they become the hunted. The sky cracked as a black mist floated up, blotting out the sun, and in from it rose an eye of red, staring straight at his soul. "My people," a voice thundered from the heavens. Back in their little village, their wives and children await their return. Families waited for dinner, confused by the shifting light. But they didn't get venison that night, they got a prophecy. The divine eye warned them of impending death and destruction if they do not heed its words. While I admit the story was not crafted in perfect chronological order, no, it was reverse engineered actually, and that may not be the best route to take when going about world building, it certainly is an effective one. Merely having a backstory for the people that wield the tool is insufficient enough to justify the design decisions you implement into the project. That would just be an extremely convenient plot device. And so, one must ask questions. Like, what exactly is art in terms of culture, and how, if it even does so, play a part in telling and preserving the story of a culture? Art is not just cave paintings and inscriptions, it is in their language, the echoes of their songs, in their cuisine, in the aroma of their kitchens, in their battles, in the legends of heroes passed down from generations. It is in their beliefs, whether they believed a god placed them here for a divine purpose, or if their gods themselves lived amongst the people. It is also exactly because of this very broad definition of art that it ends up being impossible to land on a design decision in a vacuum. What color does this culture have at their disposal to build the shield? What materials would they use? What shape would it be made into and why? All of these questions are interlinked and one heavily influences the other. Perhaps the material used was readily available and could be used to quickly make and stockpile arms, or the pattern etched onto the shield should be lined with golden paint since that's part of a sacred ritual involving beasts that strike with sharp tusks, enforcing the necessity of a rounder shape for the shield. After all these considerations, my choice of material was a solid shining gold sitting on a wooden base coated with striking red. And etched onto the edges was a history of how the Mutacan people rose to prosperity under their king, Murad. "It is no longer fit for us to stay here," Murad says to his people. "The divine eye has warned us of strange beasts, 8-armed beasts that crawl along the ground, feathery birds larger than a man that spits out flame from their beaks, and giant tigers with eyes that turn men into sculptures of stone. The entire village is shaken. Leave this place. This village has been home for as long as they remember. They ate from their berry bushes and boiled meat in the big urn. For some, it was almost preposterous, the mere idea of leaving this place. Some random eye in the sky? It's gonna take more than that for them to leave home." But the threat of the beasts were very real and loomed in the hearts of every single one of the villagers. And so they built the first ship, under the instructions of the very same divine eye, and set sail for the east. The storms raged and shook the ships, barely treading through the rough waves of the angry ocean, while serpents of thick blue scales leapt from the depths to attack them. Murad and his men fought the beasts valiantly for an entire month, for these were people who knew little of sailing, and they were most definitely not voyagers. Long last, they struck land, to the supposed salvation from the wicked beasts. It was not long before they settled down that Murad and his people realized they had jumped from the frying pan and into the fire. The promised haven was filled with beasts of all nature, giants and freaks. Yet they could not simply turn around. They were here and they were here to stay. Food was hard to come by initially as they were not acclimated to these new fruits and berries, but the chefs and bakers came up with recipes. The artisans ground up a new pigment, the royal red, a quick new favorite. When sticks and spears proved to be inadequate, the art of spitting developed, and swords and shield were bestowed upon their mighty warriors. With valor and glory, they fought for 4 long years to keep the beasts at bay and build up their new village. And soon enough, the beasts were banished to the other side of the mountain, ridding their half of the continent from any threat. The people hailed Murad as their one king, the man who slayed the beasts. Peace and prosperity prevailed for a few months when the divine eye returned, but this time, instead of warnings, it came asking for tributes and offerings. It came asking to be worshipped as the savior of their people. And while the divine eye gets greedy and tries to rule over a group of people with freedom running in their blood, let's dive into history a bit and ask the big question: when did a group of people actually end up becoming a culture? Is it 14,000 years ago when we first baked bread, or 400,000 years ago when we first tamed fire? Anthropologically, the shift happens during the cognitive revolution. It's the moment we stopped just cooperating for survival, like wolves or rams, and started cooperating based on myths and stories, creative expression and emotion. Basic necessities are met and a goal greater than that one emerges. Because culture really only is the story of how a tribe or a group of people came to be and how they choose to continue living forward, it is then easy to correlate culture with society. The big difference here is, well, the whole social part of society. Culture is about how individuals within a society communicate with each other and how they express themselves using the tools at their disposal within the biases built up from their own or their forefathers' lived experiences. Which brings up a weird situation of shared individuality, where each individual expression ties back into the broader fabric of society, whether it be in the form of similar patterns on clothing or similar colors in their artwork, or recipes that complement one another using the ingredients available in their region, adding life and meaning to an otherwise mundane routine of hunting, eating, sleeping, and procreation. Culture is then what could be termed a spice to the food called society, or paint to the canvas of a community. It is the very element that helps alleviate stagnation, and from the perspective of world building, it is what helps you build up a civilization that your audience can immerse themselves into and feel as though they were part of it, as opposed to being a spectator reading through whatever expository word salad you throw at them. A fictional culture feels real, not because it has everything mapped out, but because its people share a story. Now, this does not mean what we are looking for is just the intricate details in every nook and corner. It is in the thought process of the people who made those details in the first place. We do not need to sit down and think up a historical roadmap of what was and what could be using scientifically accurate measurements, no. Because it is nothing profound, really. It is not the philosophers and rulers who think up how the world around them needs to run, but instead, it's the people themselves are the ones who carve the path forward. Cumulative experience is how a culture is made. And now I know what you're thinking. Solid gold and precious red paint for shields does not exactly sound like a good idea for the design of something that is to be stockpiled, and yes, you are absolutely right. This shield is a ceremonious shield, made to be used primarily in ceremonies honoring their king for leading their people and founding their land, which is exactly why it has a story of Murad's battle against the beasts etched onto it, and occasionally it will be used by the single strongest warrior of the tribe, the champion of the Mutacans in battle. But if it is by people that civilizations live and flourish, what happens then when all the people who spoke of its tales pass away? When the feasts end and the arts die off? The most common way cultures end almost always traces back to nature. Nature of the world or nature of man. Whether it be a volcanic eruption like Vesuvius or the wars and attacks of other tribes and civilizations, it all ends the same. This is also where the distinction between society and culture emerges. A culture really only truly dies off when the last song about it is sung, or when the last recipe is cooked. The Eldari from Warhammer 40,000 were a race that were at constant war, but even after almost an eternity, the Eldari grew prosperous and thrived as a civilization. With this newfound peace, their culture grew rich and vibrant and excess. They soon fell into depravity and degeneracy, and their actions led to the formation of a chaos god dubbed Slaanesh, whose birth resulted in an explosion that wiped out most of the Eldari, and the remaining were forced to flee, scattering their once prosperous civilization into tiny fragments all across the galaxy. Whilst the moral decadence ultimately caused the downfall of the society, it still had not completely erased their culture. Even though their society, their government, their cities collapsed, their culture survived. Scattered in craft worlds, they kept their spirit stones and bone singing. They are hurt, but not broken. Culture is resilient. Society is fragile. When thinking up a culture for your world, keep in mind that your work raises to a certain standard of immortalization. It is kinda like the ship of Theseus paradox. If you replace every plank of a ship, is it still the same ship? If a society loses its land, its king and its wealth, but keeps its stories and recipes, is it still the same culture? Back in the real world, innumerable civilizations and cultures, their ways of living and their crafts, their beliefs and faith were all wiped out over the course of history by man himself. Many cultures barely hang on to the thread of existence after the period of colonization, and many more still suffer from its aftereffects. But the threads still spin and the fabric of culture still weaves itself. And it is important to then realize from this that culture is the art of living. Soon celebrations turned bitter and the people grew tired of these tributes to this mysterious being lording over them. The people of Mutacan had forgotten the warnings and instead started to see this faceless messenger in a less favorable light. Distaste turned into anger and the people turned to their king for help. The entire journey was to protect and keep his people happy, and he could not overlook this request. The beast slayer rallied his people and took up arms once more, this time against God himself. A fierce battle ensued and the people watched in awe and equal parts horror, as their leader, wielding a shield drenched in blood and a battle-worn sword, cut through the mountains and heavens in a single swift strike. This blow would later be dubbed as the mountain-splitting God-killer and passed on through generations. From atop the Ottomus mountain, Murad screamed out to his people. They were free to live prosperously. The people thrived in peace, culinary and performance arts thrived, and ballads were sung in the god-killer's praise, and all the people loved Murad as their demigod king. The artisans built him a ceremonial shield of gold and royal red, the gold which they found from the depths of the mountains split in half by Murad himself, leading to it being considered a sacred and ceremonious rare metal. The shield would then be passed on to the best of the Mutacan's champions in the coming generations, marking the birth of the Durad Mutawakkir, or the god-killing champion, feared among the continent and whose notoriety would earn the Mutacan tribe a rightful place in the world stage. And that brings us back to the shield. It's not just a 3D asset anymore, it's a history book in and of itself, a relic of the past with the tale of the demigod king etched into it, to be remembered for all eternity. And with this massive story built up to justify the existence of this very shield, we get to answer the interlinked questions from before. The material, why is it gold? Because it was mined from the depths of the mountain Murad split in half whilst taking down the divine eye, making it a sacred, ceremonial metal. The color, why is it painted that specific red? That is the royal red, the pigment they found in their new home, symbolizing the bloody battle not just against God, but throughout their entire history of finding a peaceful home. And the shape, why is it shaped this way? To hold back the beasts of the east, optimized by the cumulative experience of a 4-year-long war. So the next time you're world building, whether for a book, a game, or just for fun, don't just design an object. Design the struggle that made the object necessary in the first place. Design while keeping in mind that form follows fiction. Design because culture is deeply interconnected to the point that not a single question can be answered in a vacuum without an entire story to tell behind it. This was my first video and I would like to take some time to thank you for watching it. I hope you enjoyed this little pseudo-documentary, which really was just my outlook on world building or crazy and turned into an entire video, and I hope you subscribe and stick around for more.